and welcome to another episode of the Diaspora Dialogue Series with LA. I am Lillian Agbeyegbe, your host on this program. As you know, in the Diaspora Dialogue Series, we're talking to members of the diaspora and getting to learn about their different stories, their paths before they came into the diaspora, how the diaspora is working for them. And believe it or not, some people get to share one or two nostalgic thoughts about something they miss about home. Today, my guest is Gbenga, and he's joining me from Washington, D.C. Gbenga, you're welcome to the program.
Thank you, Lini, and I'm happy to be here.
Great, Gbenga. So, Gbenga, I'm going to start from the very beginning, and I'll give you some background. When I was growing up, when I was in high school in Nigeria, I was like, I was very ambitious. I was like, okay, I'm going to go to school. I wanted to be a mathematician. I wanted to be an economist. I wanted to be a pilot. I wanted to be an actor. And I wanted to be a doctor. What were you thinking about when you were young and when you were in high school?
Oh, great question. I think for me, I wanted to be a military officer. And the reason for that was you become what you see. And our motto for leadership was military men in uniforms as presidents addressing the nations in military camouflage. So that was the old paradigm I have for leadership. I think I tried to get into the military school, but I relish anything with toys about guns and military armor and things like that. So that is really what I wanted to be, a military officer.
Wow, that's interesting. So you were growing up in Nigeria, wanted to be a military officer, and then you ended up in the United States. So how did that happen? What happened along the way?
Well, I think the core theme was the theme of leadership. And leadership find expression based on your culture, your environment. The environment in Nigeria was a military rule. Um, Clearly, environment in the United States is leadership. So I think for me, the recurring theme of my life was always finding expression for that outlet of leadership, whether it is in school, whether it is in Nigeria, whether it is outside of Nigeria. My initial path was in the student nonprofit advocacy type of realm. So I was one of those kids that started nonprofit organization on campus.
So was there a leadership opportunity as a student? Was that how did you cross over from Nigeria to the US?
So I did my bachelor's in Nigeria. And when I finished that, I'd started a nonprofit then on campus. And quickly I knew that was my path. I continued on the path of nonprofit development and work with the United Nations in Nigeria. I started to travel overseas from like conferences, fellowships, and trainings in like social entrepreneurship space. And about that time, there was some form of innovation happening to United States volunteer service realm. So you might have heard about programs like the Peace Corps that sends Americans to serve internationally. So the State Department started to look at models whereby they call it the reverse Peace Corps, that what would be the possibility of getting nonprofit leaders overseas to come to America and actually come serve here and actually come give us perspective. So we're not doing a drop-down development approach, but we're actually getting perspective from practitioners on the field. So I came here to a State Department program in Washington, D.C., and that's how my whole journey in the United States began.
Wow, that's remarkable. So you had already, I mean, this is so interesting. It's like, okay, leadership is the core thing. If it's the military doesn't work, then I'm going to be a leader. I'm going to be in charge and I'm going to be helping people structure. So how was that experience coming here and bringing your experience from Nigeria to come and do a reverse Peace Corps kind of thing in the US? Well, because you had already started running programs in Nigeria. So what was the experience like coming here? Did you find any surprises? How did that work for you?
It was life-changing. My experience in the United States is not typical. So talking about leadership, so it was a group, a cohort of 50 of us from several countries around the world. And I think there were 3 of us from Nigeria. And it happened that when I was interviewing for the position that was to be a fellowship, they were so thrilled with my background. and they decided to make me the training manager for the program.
Wow.
So keep in mind, I'm coming to a new country, and I'll be managing a training program that I was supposed to be a trainee in. So that was very challenging in terms of leadership opportunities in a positive way. Just going through the old culture shock, but our opportunities were very curated. We had very top levels exposure to the White House, to corporate America, to philanthropy, to community, and all of that. It was remarkable. It was remarkable.
Wow. Well, I can imagine I came as a graduate student, and then you can be an adjunct professor as a graduate student. So I was in a doctoral program, and then I was an adjunct. And I think I've said this before. I was teaching a class, and I went to class. And because I was teaching, because I was a graduate student, my classes were after work hours in the evening. And I was teaching undergrads, and I taught during the day. So when I went to class during the day, the students brought out food and were eating in class. I'm just like, wait, what? Is it because I'm female? Is it because I'm new? I didn't know what to say, but I didn't say anything. But then when I went to my own class in the evening, I saw my colleagues bringing out food and eating in the class, and professor did it. I'm like, oh my goodness, these people eat in class. So yeah, that was definitely a thing for me. I was really impressed that you talked about the exposure that you got at the program. Considering all that exposure to leadership and all the opportunities you got, would you have said that there's the opportunity to implement such a program like in Nigeria? Like if you had remained in Nigeria and the program you were working in Nigeria, did participants have that sort of opportunity? Would that sort of opportunity had been a thing, or are we just not there yet?
No, I think we were there. As a matter of fact, I actually started a volunteers placement program in Nigeria before I came.
Okay.
I was getting volunteers from Europe to Nigeria. But the vision I had was more global. And I didn't quite see me creating a much more robust, prestigious program. Not because I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it then based on the information, resources, contact exposure that I had.
Okay.
So my actually goal was to come to a program like this, get the training, competencies, and the tools to be able to globalize it. And that was exactly what I did. So when I was doing the program, I considered the program as an international market prospecting opportunity.
Okay.
While I was doing the program, I was doing underground research. I was going to community. So in DC, I went east of the river, which is Ward 78 Anacostia. And I started seeing that programs like the Peace Corps didn't have a lot of participation from minority communities. So the first thing I started was LDI, Leadership Development Initiative, which was taking talents from Washington, D.C. and placing them to African countries. So I started in South Africa and World Bank. World Bank had a program called InfoDev. World Bank staff is more diaspora type of experts. So they would go do the sabbatical in my program. And then we expanded to East Africa, to West Africa, and then we're in about 10 countries shortly after my program in Washington, D.C. So that's pretty much, so I think that program really helped me to create an international placement program.
Wow, that's awesome. That's awesome. When you think about opportunities now, I'm hearing, sabbatical, South Africa, West Africa, East Africa, and all of this. What would you say is the exceptional thing that coming to the United States has provided for you? That if you think back, as much as you started this program in Nigeria, your volunteer program in Nigeria, and expanding it, what would you say is this unique thing that coming to the US has afforded you that you might not have been able to accomplish if you had remained in Nigeria?
Washington, D.C. is the diplomatic development political capital of the world. So it's almost like starting a program in my village, in the town, Ikorodu, Lagos, Nigeria, versus studying in Abuja, on the highland where the city power is. So definitely you get more opportunities based on the environment. One other thing I was also mentioned is I didn't quite understand the business of nonprofit.
Okay.
Business not the same sort of transactional and just aggressive monetization for consumption, but business in terms of how do you actually inject capital into an idea?
Okay.
What role does impact and capital play to actually effect a change? I was able to understand how that truly works in America.
Okay.
Also, the political component of it. So I remember one conversation that changed my life during my program was a gentleman, Brian Gallagher, I believe his name is. And I forgot his name, but his last name is Gallagher. He's the United Way. It's like the consortium of nonprofits in America.
Yeah.
And he came to speak to my group, and he was telling us like the identity that nonprofits should come into, that we don't quite understand the power we have, that we are the touch point to the community. We bring validity and endorsement and credibility to both the government and the profit. So when we working with those organizations for like fundraising, we should not just be going to them with a goal and say, please help me, I'm trying to make a change. No, we should go about it from a co-investment opportunity model. We bring the social component, which you don't have. We bring the credibility, we bring the touch point to the community. So that intersection of political, business, community impact, I was able to understand that model
Wow.
that really helped. America, the way I said it is, America has a superpower for marketing, and I said it pretty nicely, and it embellishes and blurs the line between aspiration and reality, you know? So I think I was able to understand strategic communications in America. Because come to think of it, you're doing nonprofit, you're doing for-profit, you are communicating an idea, you are selling an idea.
Absolutely.
You know, so I think that communications, I was able to understand that in America. Now, the opportunity that I was in a global program, like young emerging leaders like myself from around the world, actually have, you know, people like Fela would say they found themselves when they came to America, right? Then you actually have a much more appreciation about where you come from, who you are. That these people you think are superhumans, you probably have more than them, actually. So I think that global environment actually helped me with that. Well, not in the sense of pride, but at least you have the same everything everyone has.
I know.
That global environment also helped to crystallize that for me. So those are the things I would say I got in the United States. It might have been difficult getting elsewhere.
I know. So that's so profound. And this last thing you said, I think that what you're saying is opportunity is really what makes a big difference, not so much of potential. Because you might have the potential, but you don't have the opportunity to take advantage of it. And so you come here and you're in a contextual area of like Washington, where all the powers and all the connections are there, then your potential is able to truly manifest itself. You know, and you can make all these connections and you can take things to the next level. Whereas if you'd remained in an atmosphere where all of these opportunities were not present, it would seem like you couldn't do much, but obviously you had it all inside of you, regardless of where you were. You just had the opportunity to bloom and blossom and bring everything to fall. Oh my goodness, that's so remarkable. I heard you there, said, you know, throwing Ikorodu, Lagos, Nigeria. Awesome. There's some particular things that since you had the opportunity to go to school and all of that, there's some particular things you miss about Nigeria, like being here, like all of this is great, but please God, what is this thing? Why isn't this? What's this thing that makes you almost long for home, if I can use that phrase?
I miss Nigeria deeply. I miss everything about Nigeria. And for me, it's not so much that I'm detached or something I want to reconnect to, but now crystal clear with, you talk about these opportunities, or let's talk about power to transform or to create, to effect change. Now we have it. For me, I yearn for the opportunity to actually make that happen in my community, in my country. You know, so when I look at the news and like, this is not rocket science. You know, like when you look at it, it's like, you know, so little things. I was talking to my dad, and he shares a paradigm where you put accountability on the people for the environment. Like, what are the people doing? I share a paradigm with the system. Why would you let the system even exist for such a thing to happen in the first instance? So you hear some news happening in Nigeria, like, how is a system that possible that someone can actually get away with that? So, and we go back and forth, and he used to live here. I said that we're not superhuman in America when we drive responsibly. There are consequences that are predictable, for overspeeding, for camera ticket, for failure to pay your ticket, for failure to show up because you had a whatever issue, because they are predictable consequences for that. Because of that system, there's responsible driving, not because we're superhuman people when it comes to driving. So that is really, really what I yearn for. And that is really what I miss about.
Wow. That is so, when you talk about consequences, I tell you, the first time I got a speeding ticket, I drove under the speed limit for the next 6 months. I'm telling you, I just heard this siren go up behind me. I was like, you could not get me to drive at the speed limit. I drove under the speed limit for the next 6 months. I was shaking in my shoes. And this is one of the things I always say, that when there's no consequences for poor behavior, there's no motivation to modify behavior. And it's not rocket science, like you said. What is the there's this thing, I'm a public health practitioner in my other life, and there's this phrase in public health, what we call reciprocal determinism, that the people influence the environment and the environment influences the people. So yes, it's the people that are going to put the system in place, so maybe that's what your dad's saying, that the people need to put the system in place, but it's the system in place that determines how the people will behave. So it kind of goes back and forth. Why can't we hold ourselves accountable? Why can't we hold our leaders accountable? Why is it possible? I remember it was we had one inspector general at one time, Tafa Balogun, who was arrested for stealing all this money. I'm like, how in the world does the inspector general of a country conceptualize that I can embellish this and actually goes ahead to do it? He must know that it's possible to get away with it, and if he knows that it's possible to get away with it, what's to stop him from doing it? That's so remarkable. When you think about us getting there, like us getting to this place where we can change the system?
100%. You may have some questions for me about Nigerian Center, but this is where I agree with my dad, that, when we look at our environment and how complex seemingly some problems are, we just lose every sense of agency. Like, we can't do anything about it. But ultimately, I think we shouldn't give too much power to the government to transform things, and start taking initiative, a sense of activating sense of agency in our own little way, whatever we can. So if you look at our community in the United States, we've been here for a very long time. And you would think that a community like Nigeria, which is the largest Black immigrant group in the United States, most educated, most successful, all of that, this wonderful image that we have here, you would think that we would have a community center. We don't need a government to give us a community center. You would think that would have things like that, but it took just one idea from a private citizen to make that happen.
And it's just the first community center in the country. I know it's the first community in the DMV area, but I wonder, do you know if it's the first in the country?
In the entire country.
Oh my goodness.
In the entire country. So look at what happened over the weekend. So we had Passport DC, which is like a diplomatic festival that embassies represent the government. And when embassies could not represent the government, the community organizations step up. For several years, Nigeria didn't have any participation until people like us say, let's put a representation for Nigeria. So I think that we have to start activating that sense of leadership and that sense of agency that I believe we have that in our own sector. Another example I give in Nigeria is, right now we relish and we celebrate corporate Nigeria, But these are people like you and I who came here for grad school. Some of them only have a stint of 1 or 2 years grad school in NYU, in Harvard, Columbia, and they went back home to build a bank. And they created an entire industry. It wasn't easy, it was challenging, but they got it done. So I think that is for me the big power of being a diaspora, the opportunity to take what works in the system and figure out ways in which you can make that happen where you're coming from. I think the ripple effect of that, is going to permeate the entire system at some point. So I'm very, very much hopeful for that. I'm also particularly thankful for what the organizing we started to do in the United States. We now have NAPAC, which is the Nigerian American Public Affairs Committee that is helping Nigerian Americans get into public office. We didn't aspire for public office before, but now we're seeing more representation in America. At some point, I think that is also going to overflow to Nigeria, and we start interrogating our political system and making sure that the best people get into that. Lastly, I think what is missing for us in Nigeria is, I don't know, I think our democratic experiment, the larger populace, we don't yet have the toolkit or the skill set to demand accountability from our government. We don't have the tools and the know-how to do that, even both in the diaspora. So Nigeria has one of the largest undocumented populations with immigration in our community, Black community. The last time we did the research, over 100,000 Nigerians are undocumented.
Wow, wow.
Now, with the atrocities going on with the Boko Haram, we qualify for a path called TPS, Temporary Protected Status. But there has been no application to the government to demand one until Nigerians sent to make that request with the government.
Wow.
So I think these are opportunities that we have what it takes. So we don't have the understanding to hold leadership accountable, to demand accountability, and actually to put pressure on them. So I think with all of those coming together, I think we definitely will see a change in the country.
Awesome, awesome. I mean, what you said about accountability is so great. I know when I was working in New York, coordinating the HIV Care Council on Staten Island, went to meet our elected officials in Albany, and we couldn't get to speak to my state senator, and I called their office and I'm like, and I give them data and time. I'm like, I tried to call you this time. I tried to call you this time. Somebody called me immediately because I was like, I was giving them receipts like, I'm trying to get your opinion on this thing. We need this funding and I'm not getting through to you. And I have constituents in Staten Island that are going to be impacted if this bill isn't passed. And somebody got to me like immediately, and I was able to schedule that meeting to say, okay, you need to hear what we have to say because this is going to affect lives of residents of your community, and you're supposed to be a leader in government. So I really like that model. And one of my guests in an earlier episode said, I think we're talking about something this NAPAC is doing, how you go some places, there's Chinatown in DC, there's Chinatown somewhere, there's this place in fact, the first time I went to Chinatown in New York, the signs are actually up in Chinese. It's not like, it's not a joke. It's really, really Chinatown, And so for us to have been here all of these years, and our first community center just came up in 2022. It's like totally ridiculous, but I'm glad we're correcting it though. But it brings me to this other question where somebody said to me, Lillian, when you're talking to people, ask them, why do people abroad feel that they're better than the people in Nigeria? And like, yeah, we don't know what's going on in Nigeria and they know what's going on, and because they are abroad, if they really want to solve the problem, they should come home, or they should stop turning their nose down at us. Do you think we turn the nose down at them? What's your sense about what's going on there, and how can we clear the air about what I think is a misunderstanding?
I want to give a little bit of validity to that criticism. I think people detach from past reality. So I think we have to approach conversations with those back home with a sense of humility and thankfulness that we are not in the harsh environment and we don't have to wrestle with the type of challenges they deal with. You know, I have to correct myself too. So I really participate in public forum about what is going on without bringing any form of recommendation, you know, because I know that the environment is different. So I think that we just have to watch ourselves when we think we may appear, that is not our intention, but we may appear that, you know, that to be our intention. So I think that now I think in terms of what we can do, you know, I think people just want to be heard. I think the sense of empathy, like, you know what, I feel you. Our reality is not the same, and I actually commend you, you know, for that. But our people push it sometimes, you know. Sometimes they're like, you know, we don't have all this money you think you have. Now, when you now approach the sense of empathy, now demands now start coming. You know, I can make one or two exceptions, but when you now make it a recurring, like a tax type of situation, where like, hey, at that point, you know, we have to draw the boundary. So, you know, I said that we all have to do, you know, deal with that one way or the other. You know, I think that's what I think we should do. Our community has started to organize itself as a community base, so and just constitute that political or that community power. We need folks back home to even make that power even more amplified.
Okay.
So there are specific groups in Nigeria that I think we can begin to work with in various ways to actually be of value to them. So I give an example. It's a nonprofit called Zumunta, who works with folks in the North. They have a scholarship program. I was one of in their convention, and they mentioned that it takes like $100 or $200 to send someone to college in Nigeria. I was like, what? It's like $200 for college in northern Nigeria. So I think going through organizations like that, it can actually make a more meaningful impact, you know, as opposed to like one-on-one philanthropy.
So we're looking at opportunities to connect and give back at home. Before we go, we're getting close to, but before we go, I met your son on Saturday. And so I know you were raised in Nigeria, you talked about your dad, and now you're raising your son. Are there some things that have begun to, you know, stand out to you about the difference in being raised here and, you know, being raised back home, or based on the time you've spent here, there's some things that you're thinking you definitely will do differently? You know, what's parenting like?
So let me tell you I'm still a young early parent, but, you know, let me tell you some stories that are beginning to come up. So my wife and I were expecting the first, you know, child for both of us. And, you know, women cannot wait to start baby shopping. And so she started to get all this books and toys and everything while we're expecting. And she got this bedtime storybook, or this children's book. And she was so excited. That was the very first book she got. And she shared the book with me. And I just kept my response to myself. And she kept pushing me. Like, what do you think? What do you think? Isn't that good? I said, I don't know. So what do you mean you don't know? So when I opened the book was overtly, heavily based on race and black this, black that, black. I said, I don't know about that. You know, and she's African American, so I'm very sensitive to how I give my feedback. I said, I don't know about that. I think this book talked too much in race. I think, so when she went and stopped and she really wanted to hear what I feel, I said, what I feel is this. I think it is the world is going to tell the kid what the world is. But at a certain time, it's a responsibility of every parent to protect the innocence of the child. I may not have the same paradigm and reality when it comes to racial undertones based on where I come from, where I grew up. But I think at a certain point, we should try to disconnect any sense of racial whatever in this developmental process of this child. And so she said, what kind of book then should I be buying? Then I could not answer the question. Then, and I prayed about it. And I heard in my prayer, why don't you document your prayers? So I went back to, I said, I know the book we should write. So our spiritual practice all through the pregnancy, part of our morning prayers, that we would specifically pray over the child in the womb, speak to the child in the, I would do that every morning. So I was inspired to actually document everything that I said. So I documented in the book I just wrote for my little one called The Future Leader, 7 Prophetic Declarations for Shaping Your Child's Identity.
Wow.
And I look at identity from cultural identity, professional identity, spiritual identity, community identity.
Wow.
So I look at it from that. And these are all biblical, scripture-based, and words of affirmation. So I documented everything. It was the book that we used for our naming ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
So when the pastor came, I asked that they would allow me to read over the book. Lillian, I kid you not, I've never seen an expression of a spiritually charged environment in a non-church-like setting. There were Muslims, there were those who were agnostics, there were this, and then people were catching Holy Ghost just by reading.
Wow.
Just by reading this.
Oh my goodness.
So we developed it into every milestones, birthday, start of school, all of that. We bring out the book, we read, and started to give it to the parents in my circle.
Wow.
So back to your question, I think I'm a young parent. I'm still learning. What I know that has been proven timeless is to elevate spiritual identity over every form of identity.
Amen.
Once you succeed as a parent to crystallize identity at its core with they as a spiritual being, I think every other area will sort themselves out. I can do more. You should be speaking more Yoruba than English than now. I'm trying with that. But I think the spiritual place is what I've put a lot of my energies in. Yeah.
That's so remarkable and so profound. Well done for doing that. But even though you say you're a young parent, I see something that can ordinarily be different because, I mean, did your dad read bedtime stories to you when you were growing up?
No.
I have that issue, but also my daughter like bedtime stories, I think when you grow, as you're growing up, for instance, they have all of these things where they have parents that come to volunteer to be the room parent for the month, and then I'm like, I do not remember my mother showing up to be a room parent in my school when I was growing up or anything, I do the things, and then my daughter would be like, "Ma, you're not coming." So you have to make a conscious effort to like, okay, fine. I'm like, I'm the only one whose mom hasn't showed up for, to be room parent. I'm like, geez, okay, let's go be room parents because this is what we do here. We got to be room parents. We got to go there. But yeah, just even buying a book and reading book and being part of that. And so you're buying the book even before the child is born because you know you're going to read and you're going to have bedtime stories. All of those things are just so remarkable, and it's so enriching to really be able to recall that. Gbenga, thank you so very much for all that you do. Are there some last things? There's something that you would like to share with our listeners that I haven't touched on, about the journey from the diaspora to being here. I'm saying the journey from Nigeria to being here and how things are going and where you think things will go. Before we go, let me ask, has there been one particular thing that surprised you? Like, wait a minute. Like, is this the United States of America?
Like a culture shock?
Yes.
I have 2 stories.
Okay.
I don't know about you. I was disappointed when I got off the plane. I came, and I think it came during winter. This is really funny. Driving, from Dallas to DC, and I was looking at the trees, and I said, "Where are all the leaves on the tree?" And it says winter, there are no leaves on the tree, so that was funny. And the more I went, I was like, "This looks strikingly like where I'm coming from. Like, where are the big buildings? Where are the things I see on TV?" So I kept that to myself. But clearly, I should make it to the city. You see it's more organized, but out of car is a place, it's a country, it's a city, just like where you're coming from.
Exactly.
The organization is a little bit different. And so that was one. Number 2 was, at the workplace, like workplace conversation. So I do understand the American question, speaking or language or exchange, particularly in the workplace. So I remember this time my supervisor had me do something. And he said, Gbenga, I really appreciate when you have the chance, please send this email. I said, okay, I will. Thank you for letting me know. I put it aside. I was doing what I was doing. So she came back again. I just want to check, I just want to remind when you have the chance, try to send that email. Oh, I heard you the first time. I definitely will be sending that email. It's on my to-do list. So now she came again. I was like, why does this woman keep coming? So I asked her, oh, do you actually want me to send it now? Said, she didn't say send it now. She said, that would be nice. Oh, man, please tell me to send it and I'll drop everything. What I'm hearing is send it when you have the chance to send it. So
Yeah,
I thought that was really funny. Where I'm coming from, the supervisor was said, Gbenga, send that email now.
absolutely.
But they don't speak that way here. The question, is like, okay, would you, when you have the chance, would you mind sending that email? Of course, I would send the email. So she kept saying, I was like, okay, now it is. So
Wow, wow, wow. Yeah, I know. And I think it was an earlier conversation. Kunle was saying, how you can call everybody by name. And, and like Nigeria is like Mr., and then you meet them in the cafeteria and everybody's eating in the same there's no like senior management cafeteria or junior management cafeteria. Everybody's just in the one same space and you're all just doing your thing. And yes, nobody's over bossing you around, even though that happens. Yeah. Oh my goodness, it was so funny when you said there were no trees on the on the leaves, and you just wonder. It reminds me of one of the things that I was driving somewhere, Rock Creek Forest, where he has no street lights in the night.
Yeah.
Like my heart is in my mouth because I'm like, you don't drive somewhere like this in Nigeria where there's no street light and the dark of the
forest.
but it's been like that forever. They're not worried about it because there's nobody hiding in the bushes to jump. You're more likely to be robbed in your house actually than at Rock Creek Forest. Even though there's no street light and it's dark and it's windy and it's long and the whole nine yards. Gbenga, it's just been very, very informative conversation. I'm so glad that you could join me today. Any last words for our listeners before we sign off?
Yes, yes. I just wanted to uplift Nigerian Center. So Nigerian Center is a community center I have the opportunity and privilege to help co-found. And so right now in the United States, we now have an immigrant center when you come to the country that can support your transition. So there are immigration opportunities with pro bono attorneys to kind of give you the path and the resources you need for your naturalization, to regularize your stay. We provide capital for those who want to start a business, want to do credit, regardless of the immigration status. We do taxes, financial education, home ownership, and we now have cultural programs. Right now, we're doing the three major languages, Hausa, Igbo, Yoruba, for first generation, for those who want to connect to the culture. And I'm really glad that we now do policy advocacy, working with Congress, City Council. So we now have an organization that is truly dedicated to the Nigerian American community. So check the Nigerian Center out, see how they can be a resource. Yeah.
Right. And talking about the Nigerian Center, where you said just started in 2022, this is not something that other communities haven't been doing. The other communities have their own community centers where they help the people integrate into the American society. That's correct, right?
That is correct. That is correct. But as I said, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, but the second best time is now. So,
Yeah.
so we're doing that now. So that is amazing.
Great, great, great. My guest today has been Gbenga, founder of the Nigerian Community Center in Washington, D.C. You can find out good old Google is your friend. He shared with us so much about coming into the US, even though he was attracted to military uniforms and growing up, but he's still leading in his own way. in his own way, he's still leading and he's still making sure that things work out well. Not turning down the nose on people in Nigeria, but saying that there's opportunities for us to do things differently in Nigeria so that we can hold our leaders accountable and have a society that works better than it is currently working. And not just folding our arms here in the US to say, you know, Sarah, whatever will be, government do with us as government will, but having a Nigerian center that not only helping Nigerians to come here to assimilate, but really having an advocacy component where we're dialoguing with government. An example was the TPA, did you call it, or the visa?
Yeah.
Yes, to say that Nigeria as a nation qualifies in the special category, and citizens who come should be able to get a fast track or visa with us, something that can make them stay in the country legally, which increases their ability to be able to benefit from all the opportunities. And opportunity was one key word. Landing in Washington, D.C., the capital of the world, opportunities to connect and to do so many things, even from a nonprofit sector. I am Lillian Agbeyegbe, your host of the Diaspora Dialogue Series with LA. I'll be coming to you another time with another guest for another interesting conversation. Stay tuned. Bye for now.